Hello, guys, and welcome to the first 3D chapter of this making of. This is what happened right after I did the right after I finished, I should say, the 2D doodles. So basically, inspired by the first couple of small sketches, I decided to try and make a bigger concept. So I just try to imagine how I would like this to kind of turn up in the end. So, just taking the props that I already designed, I just kind of created a little perspective and started, populating the world in 2D first with the same props that I designed, and then when I kind of liked where that was going, I basically did a proxy build, or what I call it, a blocking. If you were in production, this would be probably referred, depending on the company, but most of the companies it would be referred as a proxy build, which is a very temporary solution, geometric solution for visualizing space. Uh, in my personal workflow, I call it blocking, and after that, I would go to something that I call a blocking plus, which is still technically a blocking because I'm generating forms from scratch, but I'm taking them a step further, and sometimes even do a high res right off the bat when I'm like sure that you know this is something that I'm definitely going to use. So I just placed some boxes around, played around with the camera, and I took my trusty NYX average men from ZBrush, exported it back to Maya, scaled him up, to get like a human, like 180 centimeter or something like that, default human size, and just started thinking about how big this set would be, how can I, populate it, how many buildings would I have, and that kind of stuff. So after that, I took my collection of photos from Dublin, and I tried to combine a couple of buildings that does exist in the city, and kind of combining elements from each of them and adding a little bit of a sci-fi twist, to kind of get it to this idea of, Blade Runner-y, cyberpunk, Ghost in the Shell a little bit, world. So right off the bat, I had an idea of having a bar, close to the camera, and I knew that even if this doesn't end up being the final place for this building, I will definitely have a bar because it's Dublin. All they have here is bars. So you have bars in every corner. So if I would make it to look authentical, I would have a lot of bars on the street. So yeah, basically the modeling here I'm keeping extremely simple. I'm trying to do a couple of things. First, be fast. Second, reuse as much geometry as I can, because it just speeds things up. And last but not least, I like to see if my idea is going to look good in 3D. So this is going back to what I was talking about, the 2D part of designing stuff. Like this is how I usually, would work. I would start doing something, and if it doesn't work, I would change it. And as you're gonna see in a couple of minutes, I do figure out that this is not actually working because, well, there's a couple of reasons for that. But first of all, I had a deadline to make this. I had less than 3 weeks to finish the whole set, which is ludicrous even, for me. uh, so I knew it that I'm gonna have to cut corners. I'm gonna have to think in different ways to achieve it, and I'm gonna have to pull a lot of long hours, or even a couple of all-nighters to get this done. So after a week of working in your studio, you go back home, and you try to do something, and your brain is already tired, your body is already failing you, but you just gotta push through. So you know this video in particular, I did a lot of mistakes at the beginning, because I was like, okay, I know what I'm doing, I know how this is supposed to look like in my head, let's just get it done. But because of that, I was trying my best to model as fast as I can, but I was not paying attention to proportion, even though I have Nikki here to remind me that my proportions are not working. At some point I got blinded by, okay, this is looking good, so I think I know what I'm doing. So, and then I started moving Nick around to kind of check if he can fit through the door and everything, which is like something that I highly recommend you do. Just import a character, any base mesh that resembles a character, and just try to move it around in your scene. And like, it's like one of the best tools for scale and for making sure that things look natural. So I tend to work in isolate mode a lot. I like I like the space that I have when I'm working on a model. I don't have to do weird camera movements to go through stuff to get to a point, but that has its limits, and it has its downsides. So if you're not careful, like was not careful in here, you can get your proportions wrong, and that is something you cannot allow to do. I mean you can do it, but you don't leave it. Luckily enough, I figured this out very soon, and I went back and fixed it. So yeah, that's like, if I can give you one advice when you're doing blocking plus and blocking, take your time, plan ahead, measure things, because when you have 5 polygons to worry about, you are not attached to the form, you're not invested emotionally and time wise into the blobs of geometry. So you don't care if you delete it, if you move it around, if you stretch it. So please do yourself a favor and take your time, measure things, because no matter how much we say, oh, I'm not committed to what I do, I can always go back and change it. Here I just realized that door is huge. And this, if that means that the window is huge, oh crap, the whole building is messed up. So yeah, it happens to all of us. But don't leave it. If you have to remodel something, do it from scratch if you need to, even, because there's no easy fix, there's no light, there's no cheat that you can do that's gonna fix a bad proportion. That's something that's gonna stand out first when someone sees your work. So yeah, do yourself a favor and get your proportions right before going into the details. And it's gonna make the whole work feel a bit more realistic and professional. So yeah, right after I was kind of happy with a block out of a bar, I need something, another building or a couple of other buildings to you just feel that gap. Yeah, double checking that Nikki can fit through that door now. So I was like, okay, just because I know this is a bar and I'm gonna have probably something similar like a shop or something. At this point, I have no idea what it's gonna be, but I was like, okay, instead of trying to design another building from scratch right now, let's just move on with this and try to think bigger picture, like what is going to contribute to this image. So stuff like sewage systems, ventilation shafts, where I'm going to have neon signs going to influence where I'm going to place lights. So as you can see, I'm gonna jump into placing placeholders for neon sign, and I'm gonna even like spend a little bit more time designing like an opening of a underground sewage system in one of the buildings, because it's important to to have that, like walking around, you notice this kind of stuff all the time, and if you don't have them, you have perfect flat wall, you can put amazing textures to it, but you know at the first glance it may look cool, but after you look at the image for a while, you're gonna start noticing that it feels empty, and it feels it just, there's something that makes it look like it's not a real thing. So instead of designing a new thing, like I said, I decided to just move the same building around, and knowing that I will replace it later, or I will modify it at least. Excuse me, to to look like a different thing. So I'd like to go back to the actual modeling, and just talk about how I approach modeling. I'm trying to, like I mentioned, I'm trying to keep the modeling very, very simple. I'm not doing any fancy, I'm not using any plugins or any fancy modeling stuff. It's a standard, box modeling and edge modeling methods for environments. For example, I have an arc to do for the sewage system. So I was like, I have the concrete piece that I can steal from the other building, and I can just make a cylinder that I can use to basically indicate where my arc is going to be, and then just selecting the top face and extruding it to make the brick layer what's going to become later the brick archway, and then just adding the appropriate divisions to the concrete base to be able to boolean out, if you will, but in a manual way with a clean topology. A gap, a hole, so I can place some metal, metal pipes and stuff like that. So trying to keep your models clean from the start, I feel it's not as necessary, but if you can, try to be as clean as you can. But if you notice, I don't at this point, because this is all a throwaway geometry. This can easily be deleted. So I'm not going in renaming groups, renaming geometries, because that would mean that I have to commit to that. And if I then decide to delete it or change it, I will think twice before doing it, because instead of just doing a throwaway geometry, I spent about an hour cleaning my stuff, and then you get emotionally invested, and that's the first thing you would like to avoid doing this kind of stuff, getting invested and attached to your work at the very beginning. That's the worst thing you can do, because the first idea is never and never the best idea. Like the more you think about it, the more you break it down, the more things gonna start, having sense, and you're gonna change your mind. For example, in later videos, when I'm modeling some of the other buildings, I would start modeling, and then I find myself not using references, and I would stop and try to go either to Google or to my photograph library to see how that looks like, and try to understand why they put the stuff that they put in a real world environment. Why would you put a trim to prevent water, for example? Where would you do it? Well, people are walking in and out of a building, so it makes sense to have a trim to right at the entrance. The simplest example, but it's something you need to think about. Or if you have a garage door, your sidewalk is gonna go lower, so if you have a car, it's gonna be a smooth transition going in. So things like that, like observing the real world, it goes a long way into making your stuff believable. So at this point I got something going on, and I was like, okay, let's test this out before going too crazy. One thing I really like to do is throwing a couple of lights, and for this particular one I'm using redshift, so I just threw a blue a dome light and a couple of purple and green area lights to where would I have a neon sign. I just wanted to see what falls into darkness and what is very apparent, so I can focus my detail in the stuff that are very visible. So in the next video we're gonna continue blocking out the other buildings, and and maybe even doing some more 2D. So see ya.